Hello, and good day to you. This is Tracy Harrison from the School of Applied Functional Medicine. We're going to be exploring yet again how disease begins in the gut, initially as dis-ease, minor, moderate sources of symptoms and suffering, but can easily precipitate to entrenched or even chronic and highly debilitating disease. And today's featured topic is stomach acid. Stomach acid, such a lowly substance, kind of like, lymph or bile, the kinds of things that we know are part of innate anatomy and physiology, but we tend to give them short shrift when looking at their potent disease or health potentiating effects. Stomach acid is such a myth-riddled topic. My goodness. Even there's so many other things that were conventionally viewed as quackery through the functional medicine lens. As recently as 5 years ago, medical scientific understanding about transcending conventional anatomical and physiological and biochemical silos and artificial separation from a medical specialty viewpoint that of course does not exist in the body. My friends, we are one exquisitely integrated and orchestrated organism. Everything is interconnected, everything. And because of that, sometimes the keys to health or the necessary reversals to address entrenched disease begin with fairly lowly substances or often discarded parts of the body, including the gut, but even perhaps more often discarded, the stomach, right? The stomach. Oh my gosh, how mundane. It's just a sac, right? An expandable muscular sac where we stuff in the food and it churns around like a blender and creates this slurry of nutrients and digestive substances that passes through the pylorus and then goes into the much more magical and fascinating and sexy small intestines where the miracle of secondary digestion and absorption happens, right? Well, if you held some of those impressions, you're not alone, because this topic is myth-riddled to the extent that some of the best-selling medications that are used today in allopathic care are medications that purposefully break digestion. I mean, bust it in a serious way. And the amount of downstream dysfunction that can precipitate from that might surprise you. But one of the largest myths that we are still countering, not only in patients and clients, but also in practitioners, is that the epidemic of acid reflux, right? GERD, gastrointestinal esophageal reflux disease, that we see and the people we support is driven by too much acid. And that is not true. There's not notable published research even justifying that fact. It goes back to a lot of myths that we have through the medical lens, that because there's a substance present in an area of the body wreaking havoc, it must mean there's too much of it. We fell prey to this myth in the realm of cholesterol, and that the only thing you need in order to create pretty dramatic atherosclerotic plaque is just lots of cholesterol. But of course we know that's not true. The interconnectedness is more dramatic and more rich than that. And in fact, you will often find that it is insufficient stomach acid, too little stomach acid, an overly alkaline environment, not acidic enough in the gastric cavity, that actually precipitates chronic acid reflux. And this takes us to some key anatomical and physiological truths. But amidst the storm, we're talking about the storm of gastrointestinal craziness that is precipitated by not having enough stomach acid. We believe that somehow it's excessive levels of gastric acid that contribute to chronic acid reflux, and that can indeed be the case, but it's actually really quite rare. And it brings us to the fact that stomach acid is an essential part of digestion. It is in the gastric cavity via the very low acidic pH of the environment that we actually denature proteins, unwind the yarn ball that is a protein in order to better isolate polypeptide chains to allow digestive enzymes to effectively cleave those polypeptide chains one from the other, or even individual amino acids from those chains, very much like a pair of scissors. But if you've got good sharp scissors but a really tight clustered yarn ball, you're not going to do a lot of precision cutting. You need to denature and unwind that protein in order to have that effect. And so you need good strong stomach acid in order to prepare proteins for downstream digestion. It's also necessary in order to ensure that we can separate minerals from their amino acid conjugates, which is by and large how they get delivered into our body via foods. We also need good strong stomach acid in order to optimally secrete and activate intrinsic factor, which must bind with vitamin B12 in the gastric cavity in order to allow the absorption of that vitamin B12 further downstream in the intestines. And so this is an overt example of how insufficient stomach acid can contribute to insufficiency and eventually perhaps deficiency of key nutrients, especially amino acids, essential amino acids, especially minerals like magnesium and zinc and selenium and iron, and especially vitamin B12. And undoubtedly you know enough about the biochemistry in the body to know how essential these nutrients are. You need essential amino acids in order to do things like make sufficient tyrosine, which is a conditionally essential amino acid for making thyroid hormone, for making dopamine. We need minerals, key minerals like magnesium for pretty much everything, but magnesium for keeping GABA glutamate balance in the body, magnesium for activating the COMT enzyme that allows you to have good metabolism and detoxification of estrogens and adrenaline, for example, and many other toxic substances. We need zinc for optimal synthesis of T regulatory cells in order to create an appropriately balanced immune system, a topic that the pandemic era has made top of mind. It's not enough to have a strong immune system. You want to have a well-balanced and appropriately tolerant immune system. Zinc sufficiency is critical for this. Vitamin B12, particularly essential for methylation. We focus so much on folate being critical for methylation, but vitamin B12 is just as critical. It's also key for the health of all nerve tissue in the body. We think about insufficient B12 being often at play in peripheral neuropathy, but it's actually important for the health of all nervous tissue in the body, and it's associated with things not only like peripheral neuropathy, but unsteady gait, poor balance, and falling. The number one cause of large bone breakage as we age. For things like balanced mood, vitamin B12 deficiency, highly associated with chronic anxiety and memory retention. All sorts of downstream disease can be precipitated from insufficient nutrients that depend on optimal levels of stomach acid in order to make your nutrient-rich diet, even if your diet is optimal, to get those nutrients from the food to where they're needed in intracellular environments where they play a role in key biochemistry. It brings us to a key principle we emphasize often at SAFM. We are not what we eat. That's woefully oversimplified. We are what we eat, digest, absorb, convert to final forms, and get past the cell membrane and bring together with the other key cofactor nutrients. That's a much higher hurdle, and it's a real shame when that whole cascade of true nutrition becomes derailed way up near the top simply from maldigestion. And this is a challenge. There's plenty of people who innately have suboptimal levels of stomach acid, what we call hypochlorhydria. This is associated with things such as mitochondrial dysfunction and hypothyroid function, hypo or hyper adrenal status that leads to notably low or notably high levels of cortisol in the body in order to prime receptors for other steroid hormones. And certainly there are essential medications that people may need to take for managing other disease dynamics that can overtly cause hypochlorhydria or poor gastric motility on purpose because of its mode of action, especially drugs that interfere with the activity of acetylcholine or overly calm or paralyze the activity of the nervous system. Things like alpha blockers or beta blockers or opiates. But the biggest challenge for having insufficient stomach acid is actually driven by two everyday mundane ho-hum topics. They are stress and use of acid suppressing meds. Stress on purpose is choosing within the body certain biochemical and physiological pathways in order to help us to survive the environment we're currently in. We know the difference between the muscle contractions and the glandular secretions and the hormone balances and the neural transmissions that are at play in the sympathetic versus the parasympathetic nervous system. When we are stressed and we're in a sympathetic nervous system mode, nothing is broken when people have acid reflux or when people have IBS or when people have chronic high viral load. Actually, the body's working exactly as it was designed to work. Because when you're in a sympathetic nervous system mode, the body on purpose impairs digestion, impairs immune function, impairs and imbalances immune function. I'll get back to that in just a moment. Impairs detoxification, impairs digestion on purpose, impairs your sleep on purpose. Nothing in the body is broken. This is about long-standing evolutionary survival mechanisms. Your body in its wisdom thinks, if I'm not sure I'm going to survive till tomorrow or next week, what difference does it make if I am fertile? What difference does it make if I detoxify? What difference does it make if I sleep well or don't digest this food well? I need to survive as a top priority. But in today's modern age, so often we're creating a sympathetic dominant nervous system activation, not because of things that truly, innately, and immediately affect our survival as human organisms, but because of the stuff that we are ruminating about in our heads, the things we're lamenting about, the things that we're purposefully bringing into and maintaining in our lives that make our body think our survival is not assured. This creates hypochlorhydria on purpose. It creates dysmotility on purpose. And this is why we must expand comprehensive health care and medical intervention through the functional medicine lens to acknowledge the overt disease-promoting effects of our thoughts, of our mindset, of what we're ruminating on, of whether our overall outlook on our lives is glass half full or glass half empty. This is not just make happy friend, smiley talk. This has biochemical significance, and it's essential that it is included in the definition of comprehensive medicine through the functional lens. Stress overtly suppresses digestive secretions on purpose, and that includes stomach acid, which actually has a downstream effect on other digestive secretions and activation, which I'll come back to in just a moment. But I want to talk about acid suppressing drugs first, because proton pump inhibitors and H2 receptor blockers that are overtly, purposefully breaking digestion, overtly, purposefully impairing stomach acid secretion. In particular, proton pump inhibitors do this with tremendous efficacy, greater than 90% suppression, which was eventually developed for a very blessed purpose in order to stop the flow of gastric acid, to allow the healing of the damaged gastric cells, the mucosal lining and the parietal cells and the goblet cells and the other tissue lining and embedded in the stomach wall, because when there is strong gastritis or even an ulceration, we must stop the flow of that stomach acid in order to allow an environment for healing. There's no way that an ulcer is going to heal with even nominal, much less excessive levels of stomach acid. And so the medications are a blessed tool for allowing healing of that gastritis or ulceration, designed to be used for very short periods of time. But what happens when we use proton pump inhibitors chronically to get rid of acid reflux? because it's annoying, because it's painful, because it's an easier way out than addressing the actual root causes of acid reflux. There are many well-acknowledged, common debilitating side effects of using proton pump inhibitor drugs. Everything from promoting vitamin B12 and in particular magnesium deficiency, increasing the likelihood of large bone fracture, perhaps secondary to poor mineralization because of poor mineral digestion and therefore absorption. Greater incidence of all sorts of different dysbiosis dynamics, including a number of different bacterial pathogens such as C. diff. It's actually a really potent reminder, for example, that stomach acid is not just part of our digestive capability, it's part of passive immune function. One of the reasons we have good, strong stomach acid is to kill off all sorts of other transient, potentially opportunistic or pathogenic microbes that are going to come into our GI tract via our mouth. On accident, on purpose, but we rely on that good strong stomach acid to kill off and deactivate those species, but also to denatured those proteins so they are less allergenic. When people have hypochlorhydria, they are statistically more likely to develop different disease dynamics of immune hypervigilance and loss of tolerance, such as chronic allergy or asthma. And this is not a surprise because we're not optimally breaking down, denaturing those proteins. And so they naturally look a little more foreign to the immune system that primarily resides in our gut. This makes perfect sense, and it's so key that each of us as practitioners educate our patients about this dynamic so they understand that while these drugs may be a blessing for short-term targeted purposes, we don't want to lean on them for chronic relief forever into the future of a symptom because there is a whole secondary set of disease dynamics that is quite likely to precipitate. And this is true of the vast majority of medications that are blessings for short-term use and can be really quite disease-promoting for long-term use. Sometimes by potentiating via a different pathway the very disease dynamic they were prescribed to address in the first place, which is a little mind-boggling, but we see it all the time, or by creation of a whole secondary disease dynamic. I want to address for a second also the notion of calcium carbonate tablets. That's another common remedy for chronic acid reflux. Here in the United States, we think about things like Tums, right? The little roll of calcium carbonate tablets that are so often popped. I have members of my family that treat them like breath mints. They can go through a half a roll in a day. And they come in flavors like spearmint and wintergreen, which of course fuels the belief that, oh, that's not a drug. This is a breath mint, right? It freshens your breath, but it's also giving you a strong bolus dose of typically 500 milligrams of calcium carbonate wrapped in all sorts of artificial colors, artificial sweeteners, artificial preservatives. Poorly absorbed form of calcium delivered in a bolus form, often in between meals. This is the type of calcium supplementation. People don't usually think of it that way, but calcium supplementation that is strongly associated with increased likelihood of developing cardiovascular disease, because this type of bolus calcium supplementation increases the likelihood of soft tissue calcification, especially when there's insufficient intake of magnesium, right, that I mentioned earlier, where deficiency is likely in this dynamic, but also insufficient intake and absorption of vitamin K2, which helps specifically to prevent calcification of soft tissue, like the lining of arteries, like the kidneys, like the joints, like the pineal gland, which naturally happens as we age and impairs sleep. And so there's a whole cascade of disease dynamics that can precipitate from this. But make no mistake, Tums is a drug. one that can potentially have pretty dramatic downstream disease promoting effects in exchange for actually temporarily simply reducing the acidity of the gastric contents so that when we have acid reflux, it doesn't burn. It doesn't create a pH environment that activates pepsin, that is literally digesting the tissue in our lower esophageal sphincter and our esophagus, or the lining of our esophagus, which over time can develop into other disease dynamics like Barrett's esophagitis. But the opportunity here, my friends, is to learn and master the most common true root causes of chronic acid reflux, so that even if people are using a drug to reduce it short term, we don't lean on that and risk a whole secondary set of disease dynamics. We actually address the root causes so the acid reflux actually goes away. And so we teach this in our gut health, disease, and dysfunction clinical course at SAFM. It's included as part of our transformative training program in applied functional medicine. Chronic acid reflux very often is a perfect storm of factors such as insufficient magnesium already to begin with, and then we take a drug and make it worse, way worse. Because we need optimal levels of magnesium in order to ensure balanced muscle contraction and relaxation, including that of the lower esophageal sphincter, that allows that sphincter to close tightly to avoid the burbling of stomach acid up into the esophagus. We also need good eating hygiene. My goodness, this is about the least sexy topic imaginable in terms of innovative or progressive health ideas. But eating hygiene is essential. It is a critical health foundational skill. Digestion is a parasympathetic action. We speak of the sympathetic nervous system mode as fighting, flighting, and hiding. Parasympathetic activation, largely orchestrated with the vagus nerve, which is stimulating all of our digestive secretions and motility. Parasympathetic nervous system activation we often affectionately refer to as rest, digest, heal, and make babies, right? It's our vitality, it's our thriving state of being. And we are never going to have optimal digestion when we are in a sympathetic nervous system mode. And eating hygiene is simply a simple, short list of practices that anyone can learn, anyone can master with enough support and accountability and repetition in order to purposefully activate the parasympathetic nervous system before eating so that you get optimal digestive secretions and motility, and that we are not we're not trying to eat and rush to a meeting or eat while we're driving or inhaling our food and chewing each bite as little as possible and then gulping it down with a big slug of water, which is going to further dilute what is already insufficient stomach acid. I'm going to share with all of you as a thank you for participating in today's session, not only an opportunity to win a free seat in our next couple of advanced practice workshops. Stay tuned. I'll give you more information about that in just a moment. But we're also going to give you access to our free done for you patient handout on the key components of eating hygiene, which I highly encourage you to use immediately in your practice. Put your brand on it, copy it, edit it, do what you need to do, but get out to your patients the important education around not just what they eat, but how they eat, being essential for disease prevention and where necessary, improvement and reversal. When we have poor eating hygiene, we naturally have lower stomach acid secretion. We naturally have poor motility. We naturally may be more vulnerable to accelerated or slowed gastric emptying, which has an impact on insulin release, right? We know that via the triggered activity of incretins in the GI tract, we are triggering first pass insulin response. This is huge, my friends. And oh, by the way, when you have impaired stomach acid synthesis, The pH of the chyme that passes into the small intestines is overly alkaline, and this changes the activity of digestive enzymes. Even if secretion is optimal, which it probably isn't in those circumstances, the activity of the enzymes is pH activated. So even if the stool test tells you that the level of that enzyme secretion is optimal, the enzymes aren't going to be as active. We know that there is impaired gallbladder motility and emptying when chyme is more alkaline, because of downstream low stomach acid. And how do we get secondary? How do we trigger secondary insulin response, right? Via GLP-1, which we got a lot of drugs out there to mimic. Because of bile, right? Stomach acid triggers first pass insulin response. Bile acids trigger secondary insulin response. Oh my gosh, talk about disease beginning in the gut. Think about insulin resistance beginning in the gut because it's affecting insulin response, completely separate from diet. Think about disease beginning in the gut of impairing the innate immune function and setting you up for loss of immune tolerance. What does chronic allergy or chronic asthma precipitate further downstream in terms of, for example, autoimmune disease? Or respiratory disease? What about insufficient stomach acid making digestive enzymes less effective, so we have more food fodder available for our microbial friends in the intestinal microbiome, so they have a dysbiosis, they have an overgrowth that's more likely to create IBS symptoms and to generate various lipopolysaccharides and endotoxins that may create enhanced intestinal permeability and create immune hypervigilance. Wow, we're talking about a lot of what we think of as pretty complex disease dynamics being potentiated, not just associated with, but potentially being created by a perfect storm, a major factor of which can be hypochlorhydria, which may be because of chronic PPI use, because of annoying acid reflux. Seriously? We can do better than this. When we know better, we do better. There's all sorts of downstream disease dynamics that can come from the seemingly lowly digestive deficiency, such as hypochlorhydria. Whew, there's so much here that we're going to talk about. First of all, I want to remind everyone that what's actually happening with stomach acid synthesis, right? We have gastrin from our stomach. We have acetylcholine coming from the vagus nerve fibers together, stimulating enterochromaffin cells down deep in the gastric lining to trigger parietal cells to make stomach acid and to make intrinsic factor. And then it's the goblet cells next door that are making pepsin. But it's a reminder that there is a cephalic phase of digestion. When we see the food and think about the food and smell the food, we feel our stomach gurgle. It may even growl audibly. We can put our hand on it and feel the churning begin. That's the initial cephalic phase of digestion, during which stomach acid is being released. It's wonderful to sit down in front of a meal and just pause. And hopefully not start shoveling food in our mouths, but to just pause and take a few deep, relaxing breaths. Look at the food, think about how delicious the food is going to be. Pick up the plate and smell the food. Do your digestion a favor. This has palpable digestion promoting, nutrition promoting effects. It seems oh so simple. And we as a healthcare community of practitioners have a hard time believing that simple things are powerful. But through the functional medicine lens, we see this over and over and over and over again. Our practitioner family talk about it. They share amazing case examples about it on our practitioner forum every single day. Things like lymph matter, things like stomach acid matter, things like bile matter hugely, things like constipation and hydration and sleep matter hugely. And when you can use good, simple analogies and stories to teach your patients about this, and they begin to make sustainable lifestyle choices, not because they're afraid, which is a cop-out for client compliance in a big way, and not because you told them to, but because they're smart. And even if they aren't trained in any level of science at all, if you tell a good basic story and analogy that just a good, well-intended person who's paying attention can understand, they'll make change just because it makes sense to them. Because in their own mind, like, oh my gosh, that makes sense. Why would I do that? And the more they understand it, the more they tell their family and the friends and the people they work with. And every time they tell that story to a friend who takes out Tums and they go, hey buddy, dude, hold on. Do you know what that's doing to you? Oh my God, sit down. Let me tell you how this works, because you probably have hypochlorhydria. And when they know better, they teach the people in their family and their friends. And every time they tell that story to someone else, their own commitment to their healthy lifestyle choices becomes galvanized. And in this way, we become a fire that lights up a whole chain of relationships for education, inspiration, empowerment, and community, and therefore sustainable lifestyle change. This is essential, my friends. It's how we are transforming healthcare. But I want to talk a little bit about pH and why it matters so much, because I was mentioning earlier the whole notion that pH affects the downstream secretion and activity of other digestive secretions, digestive enzymes that come not just from the pancreas, but also from the precious brush border lining of our intestines. And then bile, which again is not just necessary for digestion of dietary fats and fat-soluble vitamins, similar to how stomach acid denatures a protein in order to help digestive enzymes, proteases, to become more effective at cleaving those and separating those polypeptide chains and amino acids. We need bile in order to emulsify dietary fats, in order to break them up so that those lipases can get in there to the triglycerides and separate the glycerol from the individual fatty acid chains in order to optimize digestion. It's, again, an essential two-step digestive process. But we also need bile, as I said earlier, for optimal insulin signaling and insulin sensitivity, a critical component of metabolic disease that is often overlooked. We also need to remember that bile is antimicrobial. Bile, just like stomach acid, is part of passive immune function. Oh, there's really fascinating peer-reviewed research diving into studies that show us how the most prominent or perhaps commensal innate microbial species in the human gut have evolved to become selectively resistant to the antimicrobial effects of bile, like various strains of lactobacillus and bifidobacteria. But that bile is appropriately caustic and damaging to other opportunistic or pathogenic species as a way of preventing their overgrowth. Oh my gosh, don't let anyone tell you a gallbladder is unnecessary. It's optional. I don't think humans have any optional body parts. They all are essential. And even once you have a cholecystectomy, sure, the liver is still making bile and it's drip, 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 drip coming through the hepatic biliary tree and being drizzled into the intestinal tract, but we have lost our ability to concentrate a bolus of bile for episodic eruption into the GI tract, which makes sure that it has a pronounced bolus level effect, but then in between meals gets a break from the effects of bile, because bile is a notably alkaline substance, and the body is designed for this cyclical type of exposure. There are many cycles in the body: the sleep-wake cycle, right? The interaction of cortisol and melatonin, the interaction of GABA and glutamate. The menstrual cycle is not designed to be suppressed, right? The dance of estrogen and progesterone. These cycles are really essential. We are designed to have episodic eruption of bile, which has a really dramatic antimicrobial effect in the GI tract. In between meals, we're also designed to activate our migrating motor complex, the cleansing waves through the GI tract that help to prevent the buildup of lipopolysaccharides and other endotoxins that can cause so much inflammatory damage to the gut lining, creating maldigestion of nutrients and insufficient release of brush border enzymes like those we need to deal with histamine, like those we need to deal with dairy foods or gluten, right? Those brush border enzymes, really essential. We want to keep our gut lining healthy, right? Those good, healthy, high integrity villi and microvilli with this nice, rich, thick but fluid and well hydrated mucosal lining that serves as protection for the basement membrane in the intestines, which is where our gut associated lymphatic tissue resides. It's the immune system police station. Talk about things you want to be healthy. Definitely that, because we know over 2/3 of our immune system lives in our gut. And so we want to, where necessary, use medications, use short-term interventions in order to manage these things. We live in a very blessed time where there are pharmaceutical solutions for these things, which are great. But prescribing a drug to treat a symptom or a dysfunction is only the beginning. It's only the beginning. It's like the first 10 or 15% of the work. The drug can give the person some relief, some support, or maybe a lifestyle change can give the person some relief or some support, a dietary change, maybe a targeted nutrient, maybe in supplementation form because they can't digest it well. Rapid relief is important, regardless of the type you use and your modality. But it's not enough. That is not comprehensive medicine by any stretch of the imagination. It's just managing disease, managing dysfunction, managing symptoms, putting Band-Aids on them and hoping they go away. They don't go away. They get worse. Unless sort of on accident, someone makes a dramatic lifestyle change in the background in order to sort of accidentally address the root causes, they get worse. The body is a system, and no systems engineer on the planet would tell you that if you take a system that's dysfunctioning, right, and you just soothe the broken part a little bit, the dysfunction will go away. It doesn't work in a car or a semiconductor or a swimming pool or your body. It just doesn't. The natural pathway of a broken system is to stay broken, to become brokener. Right? So we have to go upstream and address the root causes. We have to address the root cause of acid reflux, as I mentioned before. We have to address the root cause of hypochlorhydria. If a person has brewing gallstones or hepatic biliary congestion, we have to address the root cause of that, which is anything from hypothyroid function to fatty liver to estrogen dominance. All of these things increase the ratio of cholesterol in bile, making it thick and more sluggish. If we are dealing with a lot of detoxification, that is also likely to create inflammation in the hepatic biliary tree so that the bile is not flowing as readily. And so it's really essential that we learn to master not just helping with rapid relief as practitioners, but go upstream to address the root causes. Very common to find people with fatty liver and the early stages of hepatic biliary congestion because of extra visceral fat, because of hyperglycemia, which is as a result of metabolic dysfunction, which is as a result of insulin resistance, which is as a result of dietary choices, stress, GI motility issues, maybe key nutrient deficiencies like chromium and magnesium. But you as a practitioner can learn to master what are all the factors potentially at play, figure out the puzzle pieces that are essential in one unique individual and address them at the roots. We know that changing a diet and improving GI motility and maybe addressing some hepatic biliary congestion with short-term interventions like D-limonene and phosphatidylcholine, ensuring good optimal hydration, maybe addressing intracellular hypothyroid function. If you address these, then the root causes of the problem become resolved and they address themselves. You don't have to manage anything because the body in its infinite wisdom will naturally return to a state of functional balance. The imbalance that was being created not by some innate dysfunction or weakness. We have to make sure that we don't inadvertently, much less overtly, make our patients think that the body is weak or broken or unable to hold up to modern life. And it's just a matter of time before you get to type 2 diabetes. It's just a matter of time before you lose your gallbladder. Just a matter of time before you get hypertension. That is bullshit. It is not the case. What we have is an unhealthy default reality where the average person we are serving in the modern world is making lifestyle choices that do not activate the natural health foundations and functional balances in our natural physiology and biochemistry. Crap food is a norm. Crap food with lots of calories, lots of chemicals, lots of colors, but not a lot of nutrients is normal. It is the statistically most common choice that people are making. And that is always going to be a disease precipitating and exacerbating factor until we do something about it. The fact that we eat a crap diet and the body doesn't handle it well is not a weakness of the body. It's a reflection of our inability to pull together as a community to educate and inspire and empower each other to make different choices. We can do this. It's not rocket science. The most common upstream, go as far upstream with drivers and root causes as possible. And what do we find? We find crap food, we find stress, and we find toxins. These are things we can change. These aren't things we're born with. Well, in some cases, we are born with toxins, and a mother that is eating crap food and undergoing a lot of stress is absolutely going to predispose the newborn for all sorts of diseases. But it's something our lifestyle choices, our lifestyle defaults are potentiating. These are things we can change. And so as a practitioner through the functional medicine lens, whether you're a physician or a nurse or a PA or a pharmacist or a dietitian or a nutritionist or a physical therapist or a psychologist, whatever it might be, a health coach, a dietitian, a nutritionist, the nurse practitioner, the most popular modality at SAFM, by the way, regardless of your modality, you can learn to master rapid relief, addressing the specific disease dynamics at play in a unique individual. We think about this as being layers of the onion. What's involved in this particular individual's case of chronic acid reflux, or this particular individual's case of hypochondria, or hepatic biliary congestion, or gallstones, right? You can learn to address specifically what is at play in their unique body and then help them maintain their resilient health once they get to it by sustainable lifestyle change where they can own their wellness, where we get out from under the revolving door of disease, where they keep showing up every 6 months with something else broken or a return of what was dysfunctional before. We've got to actually address the roots. It is not enough to manage and treat from band-aiding, from a band-aid perspective. Is that better than nothing? Absolutely. It's very blessed. And as I said earlier, we are very lucky, blessed to live in a time where there are so many wonderful life-saving or disease-arresting pharmaceutical drugs that give us some breathing space, give us a chance, give us a window to address the root causes. It's not about saying drugs are all the answer or drugs are evil. We got to work together as an integrative community. Stop throwing each other under the bus and honor the benefits and the strengths of all of these interventions, but start using them more logically and more collaboratively as multimodality teams to actually help people to get rid of disease dynamics, to actually have health care, meaning the restoration and maintenance of resilient vitality in the face of normal life experiences. This is not only possible, it's the future of medicine, my friends. It's the only way to make healthcare truly effective which it must be if it's going to be truly affordable on anybody's watch. And it's happening now. We see this all the time. It is so uplifting to pull together as a tribe of progressive healthcare practitioners to see all of the amazing success stories in terms of what can actually be addressed at its roots. But I want to talk about H. pylori, Helicobacter pylori, because this is another disease dynamic that I think is often misunderstood and is also myth-riddled. So I mentioned that root causes of people having low stomach acid are most often use of these acid-suppressing drugs and then stress, which is creating hypochlorhydria. But those drugs or stress can create a perfect storm where we have an overgrowth of an innate bacteria in the commensal human microbiome called Helicobacter pylori. Now, one of the common myths is that H. pylori is a pathogen that needs to be wiped out. And we have a lot of the same myths around Candida albicans. But my friends, H. pylori is here to stay. By the time you're a young adult, over 90% of the population has some degree of H. pylori in their gut. We actually want it. It's commensal and helps to prime and balance the immune system. What we want to prevent is a dysbiosis that creates inflammation and then the downstream maldigestion or loss of tolerance effects that I mentioned earlier. And so H. pylori is like Candida, where it can become a bully on the playground. If you think about a playground where there's a lot of kids running around, everybody's playing and screaming and doing things, and it's this crazy world where everybody's doing their own things, like a festival of stuff. Well, your microbiome in your intestines is similar. But if you have bullies on the playground, you don't address it by killing all the children, right? And you don't actually need to kill all the bullies or make bullies illegal, because bullies are pretty much perfectly wonderful children that have just gone awry, have gone astray, right? And they need some support. They need some personal attention, some mentoring, maybe some better nutritional support, some rest, right? H. pylori is not innately evil. We need it for immune priming, but it can opportunistically overgrow when we don't have enough stomach acid because it moves into the gastric lining and sets up shop and then further suppresses immune function in the gut, in the gastric cavity, and further suppresses stomach acid because it's setting up a house for itself. If you were moving into a new cavity cave to thrive, you'd make it your own as well, right? You'd make it homey. And so H. pylori creates a homey environment by suppressing your stomach acid. And in fact, even when the stomach acid maybe is higher when you support it, H. pylori delves down into its little burrows in the gastric lining and hides from that acidity. Keeping good, strong stomach acid is a way to prevent H. pylori overgrowth. But having low stomach acid can create H. pylori overgrowth, which exacerbates low stomach acid, and so on and so on and so on, and it becomes a vicious cycle. And so our goals in treating an identified H. pylori overgrowth, especially one that has started to have some pathogenic effects, where we're actually getting a notable gastritis on an endoscopy or an actual ulceration. Of course, we need to stop the disease dynamic. But our goal is not to wipe it all out and prevent it from ever coming back. That's not a fruitful path. What we're trying to do is to simply get it back to being a commensal part of our microbiome. And if we want to keep it from coming back after we treat it with targeted antimicrobials, in particular things like broccoli sprouts, really potent. There's all sorts of things. Silvercillin is good for that. Mastic gum is good if paired with other things. But if you want to keep the H. pylori overgrowth from coming back, you've got to restore optimal stomach acid levels and optimal pH. And so we've got to address the root causes. We've got to get back to optimal immune function, addressing deficiencies of things like vitamin D and vitamin A and zinc. We've got to address insomnia and chronic sympathetic nervous system mode, which are naturally immunosuppressive. When people have chronic recurring H. pylori overgrowth and they're in a chronic stress state, we shouldn't be thinking about, what's wrong with the gut? There's nothing wrong with the gut. The gut and its microbiome are working exactly as it was designed. The upstream root cause is the stress. And yes, we need to medically intervene to address that as an actual component of disease etiology. Another key consideration for H. pylori overgrowth, for those of you who already have some good integrative or naturopathic or functional knowledge, way too many practitioners think they shouldn't address low stomach acid until they're sure that there's no H. pylori. That's a mistake. First of all, hopefully there is H. pylori, and it becomes equivocal of, there's a good amount of H. pylori. Is it too much for that person? I don't know. You tell me. What are their symptoms? What's going on in that environment? H. pylori should be there. It's part of commensal microbiome. But if we don't support good, strong stomach acid during meals to get the nutrients we need to have optimal motility and a strong immune system to address the hypochlorhydria, to stop the H. pylori, you see the cycle? It'll never go away. So one of the things you can do is support gastric acidity just during meals. And you can use things like hydrochloric betaine with pepsin supplements. Especially a good idea if people have any type of esophagitis or Schatzki's ring or Barrett's or anything like that. But if the esophagus in general is healthy and the mouth, you can also dilute water, just a small amount of water, to sip on during meals with a very acidic substance like lemon juice or lime juice or apple cider vinegar. And again, through the functional lens, we know one size doesn't fit all, right? Those different solutions will be more appropriate for one person and not another. And you can get really confident on what to use when, because through extensive case practice, which is something we're really passionate about here at SAFM. Memorizing a whole bunch of protocols leads to a lot of false confidence and very superficial capability in practitioners. We're a strong believer that we want to actually practice our learning and our devil in the detail know-how over and over and over and over and over again in real life complex case practices. So you don't need to memorize protocols. You actually can innately design a protocol for a unique individual because you actually understand what's at play. You actually understand the pros and cons of the different solutions, and you don't have to have a handy dandy chart to tell you what to do. You can figure it out, which brings a real tremendous sense of ease and excitement and delight in doing this work, and a resilient confidence that pretty much whoever walks into your practice, you can help them, which is a fabulous place from which to do this work clinically, wherever you might be and whatever your modality might be. And so H. pylori overgrowth may absolutely need to be addressed, but we must take it further. We must address the actual root causes of that overgrowth. In order to keep H. pylori a commensal priming part of a nice, rich, diverse microbiome. I want to end here going back to what I said full circle. Are there specific scenarios in which we do have hyperchlorhydria? Yes. In fact, one of the most common reasons for that is when there is an ulcer, but it's not a gastric ulcer, it's a duodenal ulcer. Less common, but duodenal ulcer is much more likely to be triggering a hyperchlorhydria type of scenario where there actually is overproduction of gastric acid, as opposed to a gastric ulcer is much more likely to suppress stomach acid synthesis. And again, H. pylori is so often involved. And so I hope this session has been helpful to you today in terms of thinking about some of the root causes, some of the dynamics, some of the myths and misunderstandings that are so often promoted when we look at the gut, especially through more of a conventional lens. But I want to thank you all so much for joining us today. I look forward to being with you again next month. And if what you've heard today inspires you and really lights a fire within you to learn and master functional medicine interconnectedness in clinical practice, I invite you to consider our transformative training program in applied functional medicine. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day.